Our topic for our session today is called Rolling with the OG. Now, I know you might be wondering, well, Pastor Dave, what kind of topic is that for a Sunday morning service? Well, if you bear with me, you're going to figure out in a little while. But my topic is Rolling with the OG. Now, if you want a subtitle, the subtitle is Youth, Leadership, Change, and the Kingdom. You know, we've been talking a lot this year. Our senior pastor has been talking a lot about change and talking about the importance of handling and managing change. And when we think about the changes that are happening in our world, one of the worst changes that we've been going through in recent times is the proliferation of gangs. And for some of you, I don't know how many of you are aware, but our country has really been impacted by gang activity. Many years ago, we didn't have a lot of gangs. We didn't have a lot of gang activity. We had some groups and people used to do things. I remember back in the day I belonged to a group, well, several groups I was involved with, but I used to hang around in different areas. I used to hang around in an area called Harlem. Then I used to hang around in another area called Baintown. And my home was a place called the University of Warren Street. Now, this was a real university, but it didn't teach the normal subjects. All right, we had students. And we had customers. We had all kinds of stuff going on in the university. We teach you how to package. We teach you how to take a duffel bag and cut it up and package it up. And then you go in the corner and you learn about distribution. And you learn about customer service. So I had an experience on the wrong side, but there were few of us at that time. The problem is, in today's world, the numbers are proliferating. If you're not aware of what's happening in the Bahamas right now, I'll just give you a little glimpse because it's been on the news. This is not a secret, but sometimes people don't know what's going on. Right now in the Bahamas, they have there are several gangs, but the two gangs that are really, really causing a lot of problems today is a gang called One Order and another one called Fire and Theft. Now, I understand that Fire and Theft is updating their name now to Mad Fire. Now, let me tell you what these groups do, okay? Basically, if I understand the history, I actually know a lot of these young men. You wouldn't believe it, but some of the young men, young men who've been murdered, who they were said were gang leaders and so on, came right in this building when we had peace on the streets. One of the top, what they call a guy, I mean, it's not a good reputation to have, but one of the top hitmen in the Bahamas, he was on stage with the border crew that came here when we had peace on the streets, and some of those young men got saved, and a few of them are still serving the Lord today. But, you know, when I realized what's going on, I was like, these are the same young people who I remember trying to reach. But what happened is that these guys got together. We had gangs in the Bahamas, and they were fighting one another for a long time, but they were mostly fighting for respect. My gang is better than your gang, and if you mess with one of my boys, I'm going to mess with your boys, and so on and so forth. So they had these wars going on. But one of these guys got together. I won't call any names. His name is well known. And I understand it from the guys who I talked to, because one of the things that I'm able to do is I'm able to get a lot of information from the street because I still know a lot of these guys, and they tell me things. And they'll come, I don't even ask for information. They'll come and volunteer to me. Just about every murder that happens in the Bahamas, one of those guys will come to me and say, man, Pastor Dave, let me tell you what happened. Because one time I remember I saw a report on television. There was this guy who was murdered, and his mother was on TV saying, well, you know, my son was really a good boy, and he never troubled anybody. And so my source came to me and said, what do you think these mothers carrying on with? That boy thieved the niggas drugs. And so what's happening right now is I've been informed that one of the groups decided that, you know what, we've been warring with each other for a long time. We've been fighting one another, and as we've been fighting one another, we haven't been making money. So he said, let's stop fighting one another and let's make money. And so they took over the inner city drug trade. And they told other people who were selling drugs, what they call drug shops, they tell them, you got to close down because we taking over. And they say, you got so many days to close down. And the people didn't close down, so they started killing them off one by one. The wars that you are seeing, sometimes you have to understand the scene behind the scene. And so one group took over, and then another group came up and said, well, if y'all making money, we want to make money too. And so they say, well, we're going to set up our own operations. And so these two groups are fighting one another over drugs and territory. That's the reality. And young people today are facing a situation where things are not really getting better, to be honest with you, if I can be frank with you. I counsel young people every day. And the more I see, if I didn't have God in me, the more I would be depressed. Because it's crazy out there. And so many young people want to be gangsters. Now, I have some friends from L.A. who were part of the Bloods and the Crips. And they used to talk, they talked to me about the OG. Y'all heard that terminology before? The OGs. The OGs means original gangsters. Now, when I say rolling with the OGs, I'm not talking about rolling with the original gangsters. I'm going to explain myself in a minute. So these guys talked about what it is to be an OG. And the OGs get respect. They have credibility. I'm sure you've heard this terminology used a lot. They have a terminology called street credibility. I don't know how many of you, raise your hand if you heard that terminology before. It's really a sad state of affairs, but a lot of young people are trying to get street credibility. So people go out and do things. They shoot people, hurt people, do whatever it is, sell drugs, so that they could say, I've been on the streets and I did that. I have credibility. And a lot of the rap music today revolves around this whole thing about street credibility. And so people actually lie about their credibility. Guys will say they've been to jail for 5 years if they've been to jail for 5 months, because 5 years is more credibility. That's the sad reality. I have to paint the picture for you. I have to tell you the truth so we can talk about where do we go from here. So the reality is the times are changing and have changed. Our pastor talked about that we are living in changing times. We are living in times that are changing, but the change is not necessarily for the better. We are living in a time of changing values, changing families. The Bible talks about a time that was supposed to come when things would change for the worse. And I want to direct your attention to 2 Timothy chapter 2 and 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 1. And here's what it says. It says, but mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. It says people will be lovers of themselves. They will be proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents. They will be ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving. They will be slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. And then it goes on to say, have nothing to do with them. The reality is that times have changed for the worse. This scripture that we're talking about is here. Now, we still have a beautiful Bahamas. We still have a lot of good people. But those times that we're talking about are here. We are living in perilous times. We've moved from family matters to families that don't matter. We've moved from praying mothers, P-R-A-Y, to P-R-E-Y, praying mothers. That's the reality. We have moved from Diana Ross to Nasty Minaj. Nowadays, our singers are foul-mouthed, nasty people, and they're the ones who are populating the airwaves. Everybody say the times are changing. But now, I want you to remember this. No matter how much times have changed and what changes have taken place, we have to recognize the real OG. Now, I'm not talking about the original gangster. I'm talking about the original God. So now, if you want to roll with somebody, you need to roll with the real OG. Because these other OGs, they imposters. You cannot beat an original. You cannot change an original. You can change or modify a copy, but you can't change an original. God is the original God. He had an original plan for an original people with an original destiny. No matter how many other plans people come up with, the only plan that's the legitimate plan is the original plan. And God's original plan said, he said, I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. Plans for you to prosper and for you to have a good end. So that's what the OG's plan is. Some of us, we are trying to latch on to another plan, but I want to take you back to the OG. Touch the person next to you and say, you got to be rolling with the OG. Young people, I want you to remember you got to roll with the real OG. Don't settle for no fakes. The interesting thing about life is that times have changed, but God's standards haven't changed. No matter how the times change, you can never change God's standard. And anytime you have a question, always go back to the OG. Whenever you have a question about life, you got to go back to the OG because the OG is the original. And you can't be the original. God made a statement. God said this. God said, don't fornicate. But we have come up with some new ideas. We try to improve on the original. God said, don't fornicate. And we say, we have a new terminology. We call it friends with benefits. Now, for those of you who don't understand what friends with benefits are, it's like young people say, and I guess older people are into it now, but it came from the young people, I understand. So the young people say, well, you know, you and I are friends. We're not going to get married. We're not in a relationship. But as an extra benefit, you'll give me something when I need it. That's reality today. When you see that terminology, that's what it is. Friends with benefits. This is my friend. We ain't in no relationship. We ain't going nowhere. But when I need sex, my friend will give me that benefit. Well, you may call it friends with benefit. You know what God calls it? Sin. That's what the OG says. The OG says you could come up with all kind of fancy terminology, but I call it sin. And he created us and he knows how we're supposed to live. Anybody in this place, you roll with the OG. Let me hear you. Let me hear you make some noise if you're rolling with the OG. The most powerful thing in the world is original intent. If you understand the original intent and purpose for something, that's the most powerful thing that you could have. Anything after that is an alteration. So we have to always go back to original intent. No matter what fashions occur, no matter what changes come about, no matter what things people do or say, at the end of the day, we have to realize and we have to recognize that original intent is the most powerful force in the universe. So God had an original intent for us. God, when he created us originally, he created us in his image and his likeness. We are supposed to look like him and act like him. And so we are supposed to achieve the best results that we possibly can when we are rolling with him. If you roll with anybody else, you got a problem. And you know, for me, I learned how to roll with the OG, and I've been rolling with the OG for a long time, and life is good.